Hey guys, what's up? Public here, back with another video, and today we're talking about horrific visions, and specifically like all the things you need to know about completing them as a Shadow Priest and the enchants that come after them as well, that will be available for purchase hopefully by the time this video goes live, if I'm timing this correctly. So let's dive into what you need to know. Alright, so if you're not familiar, horrific visions are a returning gameplay that's coming back, that's back all the way from BFA, so they've kind of revisited it a little bit. For the most part, it's pretty similar if you did it back then. I will say, like, difficulty-wise, it's a little simpler. So if you're not totally familiar, all it really is you walk into either Ogremar or Stormwind, you kill a bunch of enemies, and you kill some mini-bosses. There's some affixes. A lot of them are, like, mostly, like, curse-style affixes, although there are a couple that are kiss-curse affixes. And as you progress it, like, it's harder and harder. And the very important thing is to manage your sanity. The longer that you stay in, the more that you go insane. You can kind of pause that, and kind of week over week, you'll get a track full of effects that make it slightly easier. And then you can also add masks to the horrific vision itself to make it more difficult, but then you get more rewards at the end of it. So yeah, all kinds of different stuff. It's kind of like a little fun little mini game mode. As a Shadow Priest, we're going to approach this pretty similar to what you would pretty much any open world content. It's not quite similar to Mythic Plus in the sense that, generally speaking, mobs are going to die pretty quickly, and it's really just about how fast you can progress through this thing. There's not going to be like, massive pulls like you're doing in Mythic Plus, where like, massive void forms will really shine. So for that, you really just kind of want to play like more like delve builds or like single target plus shadow crash stuff. Really, as a Shadow Priest, all we're here to do is just to dot as many things as possible. The footage in the background, I'm not playing with any mass. This is like my first run. I just did it on the PTR really quickly. Kind of give you a sense of where things are at. It does kind of seem like it's tuned a little easier than what it was back in BFA, at least to start out with. But again, adding mass will make it more difficult. So keep that in mind. Really love things like Unfurling Darkness. Void River was fun just to get that castle moving with Void Torrent. I do think like Archon Void Form builds will still be good if you like, all those instant casts with Void Bolts and that kind of thing. But Halo is going to be a little disappointing because Halo, of course, only hits enemies that you're already in combat with. So in this sense, it's kind of not cool that it doesn't pull things that you're not in combat with. Although in Mythic Plus, we, of course, would not like that. So like there's some like weird things with Archon that I don't like, as much as Void Weaver personally. I also think like Void Weaver getting access to your kind of 30-second cooldown more often for taking out mini bosses is really nice as well. So I think for most people, I would suggest playing with the kind of single target plus shadow crash of Void Weaver build or that delve build. Just make sure you have silence talented. One other thing I'll note about talents before I kind of move on to like the player power part of visions is I would kind of avoid playing Idol of Yogg-Saron or even Idol of N'Zoth. Both of those are kind of more like sustained talents, and they are found frequently in Archon builds or Mythic Plus builds. But again, due to the way that mobs are dying so quickly, those talents in particular don't get a whole lot of value. So just take that into consideration. Okay, so why do we care about horrific visions? It is just kind of a form of content, but there is a little bit of player power attached to it in addition to all the other cosmetic effects. In particular, it is the enchants. So let's kind of switch gears. I'll show the sims that we've been working for and how the enchants actually work. Okay, so as far as the player power is concerned, I do have sims that I've kind of gone through with this, but if you're not aware, basically the whole kind of gimmick of this and why you might care about this to progress your character are these runes that you can attach as a helm enchant to your gear. Now, there are just kind of a select few, and these are all reminiscent of the old corruption effects from BFA. They have been kind of retuned and reworked slightly, almost all of them, so they're not like exact copies of what they were back then. And you can only get one of them at a time. So it's not getting like exponentially crazy like it was back in BFA. Now, basically, the thing you need to know is by doing horrific visions, you get this currency. The currency is used with a quest line to unlock the actual runes for purchase. And then you use that currency to then buy the runes themselves. So the runes now also come in two different variants, a lesser form and a greater form. Pretty self-explanatory. It's not going to be anything that crazy. Just to show kind of an old sim chart, I am kind of rerunning these now. generally speaking, it's kind of doubling the effect in terms of its value. So if we look at we'll go to like Void Weaver single target, Void Ritual went from 1.2 to 2%. So it's kind of like doubling its value going from the lesser to the greater version ish. Don't take too much into these numbers. Like I said, I am rewriting them to show some more context. We'll get to those in just a second. And for the most part, they selected just a subset here. There's not anything that crazy. They're pretty much all random damage procs, aside from Less Rune of the Void Ritual. This is the only one that does something that's not a random damage proc. It's just you get all secondary stats out of proc. The rest of these are literally just different ways of procking damage on something, and that's it. There's not a whole lot of that. They do have some animation, so there's some flavor there, but that's really all it is. Now, there's a couple caveats with these, and then I'll show the kind of sims here in a second. But you can generally expect about 2% damage from using these at the top level. So it's nothing like super large, but it is something, and it will work for the duration of season 2. Okay, so let's switch gears and look at sims. So I know this isn't as pretty to look at. I apologize. I did ran a new version. I'll kind of show that. By the time this video comes out, the actual sim charts that are linked down below in the description will be fully updated. Okay, so what I wanted to show is kind of how this looks. And before I get into this, I'm going to say right off the bat, we are going to want to prefer running Void Ritual Helm Enchant as a Shadow Priest. Now, the reason for that is, one, it's secondary stats, which is just really nice and scales very well. Generally speaking, all of these options, again, they're just proccing damage events. And unfortunately, all of the damage procs have some kind of downside that sims are not going to do justice to represent fully. And the secondary stat effect really has no downside. It procs, you get the value, you're done, right? If we go through Twisted Appendage, which looks really cool, it just spawns another tentacle that attacks your target. It is requiring the target to live for the entire 10 seconds. And, it's not prioritizing targets or anything, right? So it could proc on a mob that isn't that important. So you can't really, control where the damage is going. So that's kind of lame. Gushing Wound, this is a dot, again, over 7 seconds. So there's a little bit of, target RNG of, again, is it hitting the actual right targets here? So that's not great. Infinite Stars, again, this is just a dot. Who knows what target will go on? You really can't control it. Proc rate's kind of weird. And then Echoing Void and Twilight Devastation. So these are the really weird ones for us. These are mostly tuned for melee DPS. And when I say that tuned, it's mostly just because how it's designed. So Echoing Void, Twilight Devastation are both kind of melee range things. So Echoing Void, I believe, is 15 yards. I think Twilight Devastation is similar. So if you're not actually standing in melee range, these don't do anything. So that's kind of annoying as a Shadow Priest. We generally want to stand at range, right? So Void Ritual is the only one that doesn't have any of those downsides, right? It's just all secondary stats all the time. So for that reason, Void Ritual is going to be the go-to as a Shadow Priest and for most range DPS. Now, even though I'm saying that, let's kind of go over the sims very quickly. If you look at the sims, you can see Echoing Void is doing a little bit more on average compared to Void Ritual in single target. But again, this is assuming, and I even tag this as melee, right? This is assuming that you're able to be within melee range of your target at all times. If you think about even in a raid or Mythic Plus dungeon, a lot of times ranged have a purpose to not stand in melee, and that's kind of your whole job. So this kind of makes it a little difficult, even though sure, theoretically, if you stand in melee the whole time, Echoing Void is a nice thing to run. But for all the times you can't, it's going to do literally 0 damage. So that lack of positional requirement that Void Ritual has makes it quite nice. Now you can see if I just look at makes it easier to look at all of the Helm Enchants, you can see they're all pretty close together, right? So Void Ritual 2.18, Twisted Appendage is the lowest one here at 1.8 or 1.78. So it's not that big of a deal. If you really want to play with the tentacle, I don't blame you. You're really not that far off, but Void Ritual theoretically should be more consistent. So again, that's single target. If we look at Archon, very, very similar, same kind of boat. Echoing Void still doing well. If we kind of switch gears and look at 8 target burst, for example, again, Echoing Void still doing well in AoE. Void Ritual also still up there. You see all the other ones basically fall off a cliff when we're talking about AoE stuff. This is just a 1 minute 8 target sim. So again, Void Ritual is really highlighted here. If we look at like more composite stuff, you can see this is where, okay, hey, Twilight Devastation's here, Echoing Void's doing well in this kind of like movement or ad scenarios, that kind of thing. But again, Void Ritual's still up here and it's consistent all the time. So for that reason, Echoing Void is there if you want, but I would strongly encourage just playing with Void Ritual. The main reason I say this on top of all of this, and this might change, I do feel like this is a little bit strange. Right now, the Helm Enchants are consumable. What that means is when you spend currency to buy them, and then you enchant your helm, the actual item goes away in your bags, okay? This means you can't just say, okay, I'm going to use Void Ritual here, I'm going to use Echoing Void here, and just keep swapping them around. You have to keep buying enchants to do that, which, sure, you can if you want to keep farming up the currency to do that. I think the greater ones are like 1,000 currency, so like it's going to take you a little bit to farm that. So that is technically possible if you want to do that for various different situations. Like, hey, I can play in melee here, so I'll run Echoing Void, or I can't, I'll run Void Ritual. But because it's consumed on use, that just doesn't make it very well. You could also just try to get 2 helms and just swap your helms around depending on what you need. It is kind of that stage in the patch. Maybe that's possible for you. But for most players, I would just suggest, hey, just play Void Ritual. You don't really have to think about it, and it's just going to work. So that's really kind of all I have to say about Horrific Visions as a Shadow Priest. Hopefully this video has been helpful to kind of get you into things. I will link my Icy Veins guide that goes into a bit more detail that you can check out, and also the kind of general patch guide from Wowhead as well if you haven't seen it. So, okay, that's all we have today. Big thank you for watching, and we'll catch you next time.